Hi everyone, welcome to another video. My name is Perrin, and as you know, I work for the Help Center, and we are trying to make a video kind of every week this month in support of the run, but also to raise awareness of the services that we provide at the Help Center, but also the support as community members that you can provide for each other. One of the topics that we didn't touch on last week when we were talking about mental health was suicide, because sometimes if you're having stress or feeling overwhelmed or experiencing anxiety or depression, sometimes thoughts of suicide can go along with that. So we wanted to make a video that focuses directly on suicide. So this video will be short. And if you have any questions or interest or want more training or experience or education on suicide, you can go to our website, bozemanhelpcenter.org, and you can request training information or request to participate in our volunteer training and other trainings that we offer. So please go to our website if you're hoping for more information or more education on this topic. So the Help Center, as I'm sure you all already know, we're a local crisis hotline. We answer the local number. We also answer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 211 information and referral. We also house the Sexual Assault Counseling Center and the Child Advocacy Center. So we provide advocates for those who have experienced sexual violence and free counseling services. Other programs like the Saks Thrift, and some other programs that we offer as well. So that's who we are. And as I said, my name's Perrin. I've been with the Help Center for 10 years. It was 10 years this spring. I've answered the hotline that whole time. I'm the manager for the Sexual Assault Counseling Center, and I'm also the community educator. So I've got a lot of experience with some of the programs that we have. So I'm going to be talking about suicide alertness, so how we as a community can be alert to suicide. So the fact that our friends, our neighbors, maybe our family members are having thoughts of suicide, and how we can notice it, how to ask them if they're having thoughts of suicide, and who those resources are that we can help connect them with, so that they can be supported in their experience. So suicide is a tough subject. It can feel overwhelming, especially if we ourselves are having thoughts of suicide, or we know someone who has had thoughts of suicide, or if we have lost someone to suicide. So I would encourage you to take care of yourself, to pause this video if you want to make sure you're in like a comfy space. If you've got pets, get them around. Just taking care of yourself. And if you need to talk about suicide, or if you have questions about suicide specifically because you think maybe someone you know or maybe you are having thoughts of suicide, please reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So the kind of goals of suicide alertness, what we're hoping with this video, what we can do is we can increase awareness of those in our community who might be having thoughts of suicide, increase the knowledge of the signals. So if a person is having thoughts of suicide, things that we can notice that might tell us that thoughts of suicide are present. Increase our ability to ask, are you having thoughts of suicide? Awareness of the resources for ourselves if we need them, but also for our friends, our family members, our neighbors, and decrease the stigma around suicide. So some myths that we often hear people kind of bring up at other trainings, and myths that we specifically talk about in trainings. Things like a person with thoughts of suicide, they tell no one, and I have the wrong no there. Oops, that's okay. You all know what I mean. It's the NO kind. And that's a myth. Oftentimes, a person with thoughts of suicide has told at least one person that they're having thoughts of suicide, or they're thinking about suicide, or they've made jokes about suicide. We do know that there are times when a person acts on their thoughts and dies by suicide and no one has been told. But more often than not, someone does know that a person is struggling with thoughts of suicide. Directly asking a person about suicide or thoughts of killing themselves will plant the idea in their head. And that is a myth. I think sometimes we worry, right, that we might give someone the idea if they're not thinking about it yet. But suicide is very complex. A single question of asking about suicide isn't gonna plant that idea. Suicide is more complex, right? The things that influence having thoughts of suicide is different than like a lunch order, right? Where we think, oh yes, the fries does sound nice. Suicide is often more complex than something like that. The highest rates of suicide occur during the typical US holiday months of November and December. That is a myth. If you look at least our, when we kind of look at our stats through time, kind of at the help center here, we often have more contacts that are suicide related in the spring. And that changes from year to year, so it's really hard sometimes to say like yes November or yes December or yes April. It always is changing when there are times where rates are higher, so there's no real clear, because it can change from year to year which month or what time of the year is busier for contacts on the hotline or for persons having thoughts of suicide. Those with identified mental health disorders are among the highest rates of completed suicide. That's a myth. We do know that depression and anxiety can go hand in hand with thoughts of suicide, but identified mental health disorders, that's a myth. Most suicides have 0 warning signs. There are some that can have 0 warning, but the overwhelming majority of the time, a person having thoughts of suicide has let someone know in some way that they are struggling, right? It might not be directly by saying that I'm thinking about suicide or I'm thinking about killing myself, but they will have had some kind of indication that they're struggling, that something is going on for them. And if a person tells that they are less serious, so if a person shares that they're having thoughts of suicide, they're not as serious about suicide, and that's a myth. A person talking about it doesn't make it any less serious or any less potentially dangerous for that individual. And so if someone's talking about suicide, that's excellent. And we as community members should say, I'm here for you. Let's talk about this. Let's try and figure out this situation. And hopefully we'll be able to get to a point where more people through this video will feel comfortable in asking that question and connecting people to resources. Excuse me. So some stats kind of about suicide. So suicide is the 10th leading cause of death nationally. And Montana has been, when we look at the rates per capita of deaths by suicide, Montana has been in the top 5 for the last 40 years. Typically, you'll see Wyoming, Alaska, and Montana in the top 3 as far as like per capita deaths. Gallatin County, this number was taken, I believe, from a 2016. So 22.9 per 100,000 people per year in Gallatin County die by suicide. Again, I think this was 2016, so 19 people a month die by suicide in Montana. Nationwide, it equals out to be about 1 person every 13 minutes. And that can roughly estimated to be like 39,000 more suicides per year. And that number can be bigger because sometimes suicides can be mislabeled. So death by suicide can be mislabeled. And when we estimate out, like if we do fancy math equations, which researchers have done that I have not been able to learned that math yet, but researchers have done. It's estimated based on the numbers that we do know that maybe 15 million people in a given year are having thoughts of suicide. And I think that's a big number. Like, I think people might be surprised that that many people per year have thoughts of suicide. So of those 15 million, who are people with thoughts of suicide talking to? We, as a hotline worker and as a counselor, I immediately want to be like, me, they're telling me. But more likely, they're telling me as a friend, right? It's my family members, it's my friends who are reaching out to me because I'm their friend, and who are reaching out to you, right? So it's your family members, it's your friends, it's those people that we're more likely to talk to if we're having thoughts of suicide. So our partners, our coworkers, our fellow students, right? It's those people that are going to know if someone is struggling with thoughts of suicide first, versus me as a counselor or a doctor or a nurse. And that's why having awareness of when thoughts of suicide could be present is really important for everyone, so that we can support each other out in the world versus just when, you call a counselor or just when you call a doctor, so that we can be there for each other. So reasons why a person wouldn't tell. Oftentimes the things that come up when we talk about this in other trainings is fear, right? Fear of what might happen if they do tell, fear of what people might think about them, or fear about how you might feel about me as a human being if I say that I'm having thoughts of suicide. And so oftentimes it's fear of that. It could be fear of like, people will abandon me, people won't want to be friends with me anymore. That kind of fear that stops people from sharing. It can be stigma too, because there's a lot of stigma still existing around suicide, right? The myths or the stigma of like what happens if a person is having thoughts of suicide, that they might be sent away for a long time, they'll never get to come home, right? They're just immediately like against their will sent away, those kinds of things. So that like stigma of what might happen. And then also the stigma of like, if I'm having thoughts of suicide, does that mean there's something wrong with me? So like those kinds of fears. And then personal experiences. Maybe they have shared their thoughts of suicide with someone before, and the person has been unreceptive or rejecting, or even saying things like, oh, that's stupid, you would never do anything like that, let's talk about something else, right? Like a very like minimizing, dismissing, just not wanting to engage at all. And that will keep a person from wanting to talk about it, right? If they feel like a person doesn't want to hear it, they might be hesitant then to talk about it with anyone else. So what happens maybe if someone we know is having thoughts of suicide, but we don't notice? Like, what are the reasons, right? We could just completely miss it because suicide isn't something that we have any awareness of, right? That suicide isn't something that we've thought about before. We haven't had any conversations about suicide, or the things that a person is experiencing, we don't connect them, don't connect that those experiences could influence a person having thoughts of suicide. So we just have no awareness whatsoever. We might dismiss it, saying that suicide is rare, more of the stigmatizing that only certain people have thoughts of suicide, only people who act strangely would have thoughts of suicide, or saying like, oh, that thing that person is experiencing isn't tough enough, or isn't something that would influence them to think about suicide, right? Like completely dismissing, saying like, oh, my, Joe is so strong, Joe would never have thoughts of suicide, or, Sarah has all these things, Sarah would never think about suicide, right? So we just completely dismiss that thoughts of suicide could be present for a person, or we avoid it, right? We ourselves might be overwhelmed due to our own experiences in the world and can't take on another person because we ourselves are struggling, right? We ourselves might be having thoughts of suicide, so the idea of asking or checking in or noticing that thoughts of suicide could be present for someone, we can't be there for another human being. We might have worry of getting involved. So oftentimes I hear the fear of like, or the worry, oh, that's not my business. That's their, like, for lack of better phrasing, like that's their problem. They'll figure it out. I don't get involved. I don't talk about it. And that, I think, can be a cultural thing where we, like, oh, they'll handle their own, right? They'll handle themselves. They don't need other people involved. Or maybe we fear what could happen to us. If we ask about suicide, does that mean I have to be with them 24 hours a day, every day for the rest of their lives? That, again, maybe that fear of like easily suggestibility. Maybe I'll start thinking about suicide if I'm talking about suicide. So maybe those stigmas and those myths start coming up. And so that's why we maybe think that thoughts of suicide could be present for someone, or maybe we even know that they are, but we just avoid the topic. So what are those things that a person with thoughts of suicide might be telling us, but telling us in a way that's not directly? So they're not directly saying, I'm having thoughts of suicide, which, if you are having thoughts of suicide and you feel comfortable saying that, is really important, right? Letting someone know that you trust, reaching out to the hotline, letting someone know that that's present for you is really important, right? So what about for us, right? The friends, the family members, the people kind of around, like how do we notice that thoughts of suicide could be present? So what actions do you see? So like risky behaviors, maybe their mood has changed, and to the point it feels like sudden, maybe, or even in like over time, you've noticed their mood change over the past couple of months. Withdrawing, maybe you used to engage or talk on the phone a lot, or, go hiking or play video games together a lot more. And now that's slowly, like, the person's slowly not participating. Alcohol or drug misuse. So maybe they're increasing the amount of alcohol, or maybe they started drinking, or maybe they're starting to use drugs more frequently, or they've started using drugs. And that could be in a risky way as well. Maybe they have started drinking and driving, or maybe engaging in alcohol or drug use in a risky way. Expression, so what are the things that we hear? So what is this person saying? Maybe they're talking about feeling really alone, they're a burden, they don't have a purpose, or they just want to escape. And some of this can sound, I think sometimes we communicate as human beings, we communicate pain through sarcasm or through humor. And so having awareness that maybe sometimes when a person is joking about being a burden or having no purpose, or saying things like, oh, I should just die, this is just so awful, like saying that in a funny way, that maybe it's just humor and they're being hyperbolic, but maybe there's something more going on there too. What are the things that they are feeling and you are feeling? And this can sometimes be kind of like the confusing part of this one, of this kind of like way that people communicate, because maybe when you're with them, you notice that they feel different, like they feel more numb, or they feel more helpless. They don't engage with you in the same way in conversation. You're just feeling like they feel different. And maybe they're saying this, right? This could be a part of what they're expressing, that there's no hope, that they can't do anything. They're expressing maybe feeling a lot of shame. And then the final one is life events. So any kind of stressful events can influence a person having thoughts of suicide. So any financial stress, that could be job changes, job losses, relationship changes. And that's more than just like partnerships, you know, husbands and wives, boyfriends, girlfriends. That's like family relationships, right? If something is going on with their siblings, or there's a more stress between their parents, their family members, right? So any kind of life event around loss, basically. So if they've lost someone, if they've lost a job, if a relationship has ended, financial stress, if they've ever experienced trauma, so abuse, can influence thoughts of suicide. Rejection, so maybe they've applied to a school, or they've applied for a job, or they've asked someone on a date, and they've been rejected. That could influence thoughts of suicide. And then if they themselves have thought about suicide before, or have acted on thoughts of suicide, or they've lost someone. So if they have lost someone to suicide, or been close to someone who has died by suicide, they might be having thoughts of suicide of their own. So these are all like life events. And one thing that I kind of think about, if it is a loss of any kind for a human, right? So any kind of loss that a human can go through, and there's pain or stress or overwhelm, then the potential for thoughts of suicide is there. And so these are all things to kind of keep in mind. And, you know, this year has been particularly stressful because some of these things maybe have happened, and kind of been forced on us, right? We've kind of been forced to withdraw from each other during a pandemic because we are close to each other, right? We can't go out and do the same activities maybe that we had before. Like in financial stress during this year has been really big, you know, with the school changes. If you have children, that can be really stressful for parents and really stressful for the kids. So all of these things that have happened this year are things that could contribute to a person having thoughts of suicide. So having awareness is really important, and awareness that, you know, thoughts of suicide happen in human beings, and there are experiences that influence that is really important. So what do we do? Let's say we see these invitations, these signals, we see these, maybe a person saying they feel hopeless, maybe we know that there's been a change in their job, or they've lost a friend recently. What do we do? So as clear as I can say it, is we ask directly and clearly. In other forums or other presentations, other trainings, we often ask why is directly and clearly the most important in the way that we should ask. And oftentimes we get things like, well, because if you don't ask directly, you might not be sure that that's what we're talking about, right? Like if you use phrases like, are you going to hurt yourself, right? That could mean something different to me than it means to you. And so we're not talking about the same thing, right? Or kind of like if you ask in a way that suggests judgment or shame, or that you don't want to hear about it, right? So if you say like, you're not thinking about doing something stupid, are you? You know, a person isn't likely to give you an honest answer in that situation, because we've, in that moment, maybe already shown that we feel uncomfortable talking about suicide, or we're not sure, or we have stigma around it. So directing or asking directly and clearly is the best way, because then both you, the person asking, and you, the person being asked, know what's on the table, right? We know what we're talking about. So an example, I like to give evidence for why I'm asking, and this might feel more comfortable for you. If you ever have to ask about suicide, is I'm hearing you say you feel hopeless and like things won't change. You also said that you lost your job recently. Sometimes when people experience that, they might think about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? So that feels good for me, but that might not feel great for you. So figuring out a way to say it, but still asking directly, are you thinking about suicide, is the most important, because maybe you're talking with someone that you're really close to, or maybe someone that you're not close to at all, but just figuring out a way to ask that directly is really important. So once you ask the question, you might get the answer of no, I'm not. And that's okay. You say, okay, I just wanted to ask, let's continue talking about what we were talking about, or let's continue doing what we were doing, right? You might get the answer yes. And so what we'll need to do then is listen, right? And that's probably the step that feels the hardest, because you know that a person is thinking about suicide. And you want to support them. You're not really sure what to do, maybe. But asking, like, okay, so you are thinking about suicide. Tell me what's going on. Tell me about the thoughts. Tell me tell me what's going on, that it's gotten to the point that you're thinking about suicide, right? So just trying to figure out what's going on. And this step is helpful, because maybe this person has kept these thoughts on the inside for so long that being able to share them out loud is really connecting. And we know that connecting is a support, right? Having a connection supports those who are having thoughts of suicide stay connected to life. And so when I kind of present on this, I often ask, like, have you ever felt heard? Have you ever been in a conversation when you said, this person is really hearing me. This person really understands what I'm going through. Thinking about what that feels like, maybe what that person did, but also then thinking about, have you ever felt like dismissed? Have you ever felt like no, someone wasn't listening to you? We all have, right? What did that feel like? And so remembering what it was like and what happened in those conversations is really important, because we want to create a situation where we listen and hear, right? We don't want a situation where a person feels like they're not being heard, because that could lead to them maybe hesitating to talk about suicide in the future, or create more stigma or fear for them. So creating a space where we remember what it felt like to be heard and try and give that same experience to them. So how we might respond is, okay, this is important. I'm here, I'm listening. Tell me what's going on. And so the next step, right? So we listen, and we listen for however long it feels important, right? We listen however long we can. Maybe we're in a situation where we can't listen for more than 10 minutes, and we might let them know, like, hey, I've only got a couple of minutes, but I really want to listen, and then we can maybe find someone that can be there with us, right? Who can be there with you if I've got to go do something else, right? And so making a connection with someone local, making a connection with someone who can be there with them. What if someone says they don't want to, right? So you've asked about suicide, they've said yes, but they don't want to tell anyone, right? And they say they're fine. Other things are important, right? I don't need to talk to anyone else. Maybe we believe them, but maybe just making that connection is important, of saying, like, okay, I hear you. Let's just give them a call real fast and kind of see what they sound like, so that you know you've got them, or you've got this number. And then maybe checking in with them, right? Of saying, like, hey, I give you that number. I know you said yesterday you didn't want to, but maybe today we could reach out and talk to someone. Because it sounds like we're going through a lot right now, and having more people to support us is good, because human beings, for lack of a better word, we're pack animals. We need to be around people that support us. We need to be connected with people. And so just trying to remake that connection. So one thing too is you come first. So if there's a situation where you've asked about suicide but you don't feel safe, the connecting them to the supports and resources part comes first. So you've asked about suicide, but maybe you don't feel safe listening you just immediately move over to that resources. Or maybe we ourselves are overwhelmed and maybe won't be able to provide support in that moment. We say, thank you so much for telling me. I want to support you, so let's together contact someone who can support us and kind of help us figure out what's going on and what we can do. So moving right into that resource step if that feels important to do. And, we at the hotline are always here. So you can call us and say, I spoke with my friend, or I spoke with my family member, or I'm about to speak to my family member. You can reach out to us and we're available for you. So things that aren't really helpful in this situation are judgment, right? So saying phrases or words, or maybe using a tone of voice that suggests that we think something's not okay, or we have strong feelings in the opposite direction, can shut a person down and contribute maybe to them not wanting to talk about suicide in the future. Responding with anger, right? Like, how could you be thinking about this, right? That might shut a person down. Negativity, panicked, which can be tough, right? If you're talking with someone who's having thoughts of suicide, it can be tough to not feel panicked, but also remembering, right, that you're not alone in this. You can reach out for support. Advice giving, it can feel really good to give advice, but I'm sure all of us have gotten advice and been like, ooh, that's not quite what I was looking for, or that's not going to work for me. Why are you suggesting that? So remembering that what works for us might not work for them. And so saying things like, oh, I've got the perfect thing. We're going to do step 1, step 2, step 3, and then your thoughts of suicide will be gone, right? That might not work for them. And so holding back from advice giving and sticking to listening and connecting to resources. And then impatience, right? Looking at our phone a lot, or watching the clock, or aggressively trying to leave the situation. Something like that might make or can make a person feel like it's not important what they're saying, and can contribute maybe to that fear or stigma of talking about suicide. Things that are helpful, right? Being caring, direct, and calm, sensitive, having awareness that humans go through tough stuff, and sometimes tough stuff makes us think about suicide. So having that awareness and that sensitivity that, humans experience rough stuff all the time. Being patient, calm, non-judgmental. These are all things that'll be helpful in that listening space and help a person feel safer in connecting to resources. So some of the resources. So you can contact the help center at our local number 24 hours a day. You can also, if you're looking for specific resources, so if someone is like, I want a counselor or other specific resources, you could go to Montana 211, and we have a database there that you can find specific resources. The National Suicide Lifeline, so that's a national number. You can call that from any phone number and get connected with someone. The Gallatin Mental Health Center provides crisis counseling and provides counseling services. Hope House is a crisis stabilization center. So if a person wanted to stay somewhere for a couple of days, you could go to Hope House or call Hope House and speak with a person who will do an evaluation, who will kind of talk with you. And you might be able to stay somewhere for a couple of days, and you would talk with a counselor. You would, if medication feels like a support, you could talk with someone there about that, and just kind of give you a couple of days of a break from kind of what's going on. And hopefully then you're set up and you feel more set up. And you know your supports, you know who to connect with, and resources that are really there for you. If there's a situation where you know a person is not safe or you yourself feel safe, you can call 911. And then there's also Community Health Partners provides medical and mental health counseling. And then Providence Mental Health provides counseling as well. So some of these are options for if someone's interested in counseling or long-term support. And then if you're needing or having questions, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or you can call the Help Center at any moment for support. I've also included their, I believe right now, it's happening over like Zoom or a similar format, the Suicide Survivor Group. So that's for persons who have lost someone to suicide. And it's a support group that people can kind of come together and talk. So yeah, those are the resources. So thank you so much for joining me on this very quick conversation about how to ask and listen, and then we connect to supports and resources, right? We connect them with someone that can support them. It was very quick, and so like I said at the beginning, if you're interested in more education and more information on this, please feel free to call the Help Center or go to our website. And thank you so much. We'll see you later.